The prince thought he was marrying an ugly woman in an arranged marriage. But when she lifted the veil, he was left speechless by what he saw. The royal gardens of Westridge Castle were designed with one purpose in mind: to be admired from a distance. Their severe geometry, with hedges clipped at perfect right angles and flowers planted in rigid formations, mirrored the kingdom's martial values. No place for wildness, no room for disorder. Just like the castle's inhabitants, Prince Nathaniel knew every guard rotation by heart. As the full moon bathed the eastern wall in silvery light, he counted silently. 3, 2, 1. The torchlight disappeared around the corner, and he sprang from his hiding place behind a stone cherub. 20 seconds to scale the wall, another 30 to reach the cover of the old oak tree beyond. "You're getting slow, Your Highness," Nathaniel muttered to himself as he dropped to the ground with a soft thud, his breathing slightly heavier than it should have been. At 25, he wasn't exactly ancient, but these escapes had been easier a decade ago. The rough wool of a commoner's cloak scratched against his neck as he pulled the hood lower. The fabric smelled of wood smoke and ale, authenticity that cost him a pretty penny from the castle laundress who procured these disguises, worth every coin for the freedom it bought. An hour later, Nathaniel sat in the corner of the Broken Shield Tavern, a mug of watered-down ale before him. Unlike the castle, with its cold stone and echoing halls, this place felt alive. People laughed without restraint, argued without ceremony, loved without calculation. "Another round for me and my friend here." A weathered farmer dropped onto the bench across from Nathaniel, sloshing his drink. "Nathan, isn't it? Haven't seen you round in months." "Been busy," Nathaniel replied, deepening his voice slightly. "My master's orders keep me traveling. Still apprenticing with that merchant, eh? Better life than mining or plowing, I reckon." Nathaniel nodded, the lie familiar on his tongue. For years he'd been Nathan the merchant's apprentice to these people, a traveler who passed through occasionally, friendly but mysterious. It was easier than constructing elaborate backstories. People filled in the blanks themselves. The farmer leaned in, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Heard about the wedding. The prince is to marry some foreign monster woman. They say she's got scars all over, that they kept her locked in a dungeon for years." "Oh," Nathaniel managed, his knuckles whitening around his mug. "Aye, poor bastard. But that's royal folk for you. Bloodlines over happiness. Always." As the evening wore on, similar conversations played around him. His impending marriage was on everyone's lips, the rumors growing more outlandish with each retelling. By midnight, his bride had transformed from merely scarred to half-beast, with claws and teeth that could tear a man apart. The walk back to the castle felt colder than usual. "You missed council again this morning." King Frederick's voice was like the castle itself, cold, hard, unyielding. Nathaniel stood at attention in his father's study, hands clasped behind his back. Sunlight filtered through narrow windows, illuminating the king's gray-streaked beard and the deep lines around his eyes. At 50, Frederick looked 20 years older, as if each day of rule had cost him 2. "I was unwell, father. Unwell from too much ale, no doubt." The king didn't look up from the scroll before him. The wedding preparations accelerate. East Shore's delegation arrives in a fortnight. So soon. Nathaniel couldn't keep the dismay from his voice. At this, Frederick raised his eyes. "War comes even sooner if we delay, or have you forgotten the border skirmishes, the raided villages, East Shore arms for conflict, and our granaries cannot sustain another winter of war. I understand the alliance is necessary, but nothing." Frederick stood, seeming to fill the room despite his average height. "You've had your youthful indulgences. Now you do your duty. The Vidente's prophecy is clear. When the blood divided unites again, the kingdoms shall flourish. But if the veil of lies remains, all will be consumed by flames. Prophecies are open to interpretation," Nathaniel countered. A rare smile, cold as winter, crossed Frederick's face. "Not this one, my son. Not when interpreted correctly." The dismissal in his tone was clear. Nathaniel bowed stiffly and left, his footsteps echoing on marble as he marched through corridors adorned with battle tapestries and ancestral portraits, faces that seemed to judge him from their gilded frames. He found Lady Rebecca in the west solar, afternoon light turning her auburn hair to living flame. As always, her beauty struck him physically, a tightness in his chest that had not diminished in 3 years of secret encounters. "My prince looks troubled," she observed, not looking up from her embroidery. Her voice was warm. Honey poured over ice. "The bride comes in 2 weeks." Now she did look up, green eyes narrowing slightly. "So soon, the rumors must be true then. They're desperate to be rid of her." Nathaniel dropped onto a settee, running his hands through his dark hair. "Everyone speaks of her as if she's some kind of monster. Consider it a blessing." Rebecca set aside her needlework and moved to sit beside him, close enough that the scent of jasmine enveloped him. "If she's as hideous as they say, no one will blame you for seeking comfort elsewhere." Her hand found his, fingers intertwining. "We need only endure the ceremony after that. After that, we continue as we have." He completed her thought, a familiar fantasy. She to her quarters, me to mine, and you, in between. Rebecca's smile was dazzling, conspiratorial. "But we mustn't leave it to chance. The marriage must be quickly annulled. Father will never agree. The alliance can be secured by treaty alone," she countered, "but only if she's publicly rejected. A humiliation so complete that even East Shore would prefer to forget the arrangement." Nathaniel hesitated. "What do you propose?" Rebecca leaned closer, her lips nearly brushing his ear. "A plan that ensures she never feels welcome here, beginning at the ceremony itself," as she outlined her scheme. Nathaniel felt a shadow of guilt. Then he remembered the farmer's words. That's royal folk for you. Bloodlines over happiness. If his father would sacrifice his happiness for politics, why should he show more mercy to this stranger than had been shown to him? Yet that night, as he stood at his chamber window gazing toward East Shore's distant mountains, a different memory surfaced. A girl with eyes like summer sky, teaching him to bind a wound with herbs and clean linen. Her gentle hands, her quiet wisdom. The look of betrayal as royal guards dragged her away for a theft she didn't commit. A crime he'd been too cowardly to prevent. 10 years ago. Another life. He wondered what became of her. That peasant girl whose name he never learned, whose face time had begun to blur like a reflection in troubled water. Little did he know that across the mountains, that same face was gazing back toward Westridge, a silver bracelet gleaming on her wrist. Its entwined eagle and rose catching the moonlight, dawn broke over the village of Thornbrook with a gentle persistence, filtering through the cracks in Eleanor's shutters and painting golden stripes across her modest bed. She'd been awake for hours already, her fingers absently tracing the silver bracelet that never left her wrist. Today was the day. "Child, are you decent?" A voice called from beyond her door, raspy with age but strong with purpose. "Yes, Mistress Wren," Eleanor answered, quickly tucking a small bundle of lavender beneath her pillow. A charm for courage, though she'd never admit to such superstitions. The old woman who entered moved with surprising grace despite her years. Mistress Wren had been many things in her long life. Midwife, healer, confidant to queens. Though in Thornbrook, she was simply the peculiar old woman who had taken in an orphaned girl 15 years ago. "You haven't slept," Wren observed, setting down a tray with bread and herbal tea. "How could I?" Eleanor's smile was tight. "Everything changes today." Wren's gnarled hand covered Eleanor's, stilling the nervous movement around her bracelet. "Not everything. Not what matters most." Eleanor looked down at the silver band with its intricate design. An eagle, and rose intertwined in eternal embrace. Her earliest memory was of her mother's face, wan and bloodied, pressing the bracelet into her tiny hands. "Never remove it. Never forget who you are." Words whose meaning had remained shrouded in mystery until Wren began revealing the truth, piece by careful piece. Over the past year, "The royal party will be here by midday," Wren said, moving to a trunk in the corner. "We should prepare." From the trunk emerged a dress unlike anything Eleanor had ever worn. Deep blue silk embroidered with silver thread that caught the light like dewdrops. Not extravagant enough to raise suspicions in the village, but finer than a healer's apprentice had any business owning. "You've been planning this for a long time," Eleanor murmured, running her fingers over the fabric. 15 years, Wren replied simply. "Since the night I smuggled a terrified child from a burning palace, the heir to East Shore hidden beneath my cloak while her mother's blood dried on my hands." Eleanor flinched at the bluntness. Even after a year of gradual revelations, Hearing her true history spoken aloud felt like listening to a story about someone else. A lost princess whose mother was murdered, whose identity was erased, whose rightful place was stolen. "And now I'm to marry the Prince of Westridge," she said, the words tasting foreign on her tongue. "A man I've never met, whose father may well have orchestrated my mother's death." "We don't know that," Wren cautioned. "What we know is that this marriage was your mother's final command to me before she died. When she comes of age," she said, "the eagle and rose must be reunited." Cryptic last words, Eleanor muttered, turning to gaze out the window toward the village square, where she had spent 15 years as a commoner. She watched children chase each other around the well, women beating rugs in doorways, men repairing tools for the day's work. Her people, more truly hers than any royal subjects could ever be. "What if I refuse?" she asked suddenly. "What if I stay Eleanor the healer's apprentice?" Wren's face hardened. "Then you condemn both kingdoms to war. The treaty hinges on this marriage. A treaty based on lies. They think they're getting Eleanor of Eastshore, raised in seclusion, not whatever I am. You are exactly who you were born to be," Wren said fiercely. "These years among the people have given you wisdom no palace could teach. You know their struggles, their joys. What better preparation for a queen?" Eleanor closed her eyes, remembering countless nights spent delivering babies, nursing the sick, easing the passing of the elderly. The reverence in people's eyes when a remedy worked. Their gratitude for simple kindnesses. Then she thought of court life as Wren had described it. The scheming, the backstabbing, the hollow performances of respect. "They say I'm deformed," she said quietly, "that I've been locked away because I'm too hideous to be seen. Rumors spread by those who fear your return," Wren dismissed. "Let them underestimate you. It's always been your strength, to be more than anyone expects." A distant horn sounded, announcing the royal escort's approach. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the dress. "There's something I haven't told you," she said, her voice barely audible. "About the prince." Wren paused, head tilted questioningly. "I've met him." Eleanor swallowed hard. 10 years ago, he came to the village disguised as a merchant's apprentice. We spoke for hours by the river while I gathered herbs. He seemed kind, different from what you'd expect of royalty. Recognition dawned in Wren's eyes. "The boy you helped when the miller caught him trespassing. The one who stood silent while guards arrested me for theft," Eleanor finished, an old pain resurfacing. "Yes, that one. You never said he was the prince." "I didn't know then. I only realized it later when I saw a royal procession pass through. He was there, in full regalia." Eleanor's laugh was hollow. "Quite the coincidence that I'm to marry the only nobleman I've ever truly met, and the only one who's ever betrayed me." Wren's expression softened. "Perhaps not coincidence at all, child. The bracelet has old magic, not the showy kind that makes kings uneasy, but the quiet sort that bends paths toward their proper destinations." Eleanor was saved from responding by another blast of the horn. Much closer now. Quickly, she donned the blue dress, allowing Wren to arrange her long blonde hair in a style that was elegant yet modest. When she glanced in the small looking glass, a stranger gazed back. Somehow both the village healer and someone else entirely. Someone with eyes too old for her years, and a bearing that came from somewhere deep in her blood. "Remember," Wren said, as she fastened a simple silver pendant around Eleanor's neck. "Reveal nothing until the right moment. Not about your past, not about the bracelet. Trust no one at court until you're certain of their loyalties. And when will that be? You'll know." Wren pressed a small pouch into her hand. Valerian root mixed with dried rose petals for sleep, and this, she pressed a second smaller pouch, is foxglove. Deadly in the wrong dose. Keep it hidden, but close. Eleanor tucked both into a hidden pocket sewn into her sleeve. "You think I'll need to defend myself at my own wedding?" "I think," Wren said carefully, "that the veil of lies is about to be lifted, and not everyone will welcome what lies beneath." She cupped Eleanor's face in her weathered hands. "You were hidden to keep you safe. Now you return to claim what's yours. Remember who raised you, but never forget who you are." Outside, horses' hooves clattered on cobblestones. A magnificent carriage emblazoned with the East Shore crest. a swan rising from water, waited in the village square. Beside it stood royal guards in gleaming armor, their presence causing a stir among the villagers who gathered to gawk. Eleanor took one last look at the cottage that had been her sanctuary. Then, head high and back straight, she stepped into the sunlight to meet her destiny. Behind her, Wren's lips moved in silent prayer to gods older than any kingdom. Protect her when I cannot, guide her when she's lost, and forgive me for the truths I still keep hidden. The great cathedral of Westridge loomed like a stone giant against the morning sky, its spires piercing the heavens as if demanding the gods bear witness to the events below. Inside, hundreds of candles cast a golden glow over assembled nobility, their silks and jewels creating a sea of color beneath the soaring arches. Prince Nathaniel stood rigid at the altar, resplendent in ceremonial armor that gleamed silver and blue. The traditional sword of Westridge hung at his hip, a weapon that had never tasted battle, used only for the symbolic protection of royal brides. Today, he thought grimly, it would serve a different purpose: intimidation. Stop fidgeting, King Frederick muttered from beside him. You look like a boy at his first hunt. I feel more like the prey, Nathaniel replied under his breath. From the corner of his eye, he caught Lady Rebecca's gaze from her position among the court ladies. She offered the slightest nod, confirmation that all was prepared, the goblet with wine that would spill accidentally on Eleanor's gown, the loose stone on the cathedral steps that would trip her during the ceremonial exit, the whispers already circulating that would make even the kindest interpretation of her reactions seem monstrous. A humiliation so complete that the marriage would be annulled before nightfall. That was Rebecca's promise. The cathedral doors swung open. A collective intake of breath rippled through the assembly as the East Shore procession entered. First came the court officials in their distinctive sea-green robes, followed by stone-faced guards. Then, a small figure draped in white so thick and voluminous that no hint of the woman beneath could be discerned. The veil covering Eleanor's face fell from a silver circlet to below her shoulders, as opaque as midnight fog. With each step she took down the endless aisle, Nathaniel steeled himself for what would be revealed. Scars, deformities, the monster bride everyone whispered about. A strange hush fell as she reached the altar. Up close, he could see her hands trembling slightly. Small and pale against the white of her gown, the priest began the ancient words, his voice echoing through the cathedral's vastness. But Nathaniel barely heard him. His focus narrowed to that veil, to the moment it would lift and seal both their fates. Who gives this woman to be wed? The priest intoned. An elderly man from the East Shore delegation stepped forward. I, Lord Pembroke, Regent of East Shore, to present Princess Eleanor, daughter of the late King Edward and Queen Sophia, to this union. More words, more ritual. The sword of Westridge was unsheathed and presented to Eleanor, a symbolic gesture offering the prince's protection. Her hands accepted it with surprising steadiness, returning it to Nathaniel with the traditional response, I accept your protection and offer my loyalty in return. Her voice struck him like a physical blow, soft yet clear, with a lilt he'd heard before, somewhere long ago. Then came the moment, as tradition dictated. The bride would unveil herself to her husband before the eyes of gods and kingdom. Time seemed to slow as Eleanor's hands rose to her circlet. Nathaniel was vaguely aware of Rebecca leaning forward in anticipation, of his father's calculating gaze, of the collective breath held by hundreds of onlookers. The veil lifted. The world stopped. Standing before him was no scarred, monstrous creature, no deformed face that would haunt children's nightmares. Instead, he found himself staring into eyes the color of summer sky, eyes he'd seen before, beside a river. A lifetime ago, she'd changed. The girl he remembered had been barely more than a child with a round face and simple clothes. This woman had high cheekbones, a graceful neck, and a quiet dignity that no royal training could fake. But those eyes, he could never forget those eyes, which had once looked at him not as a prince but simply as a man. It's you, he whispered, too stunned to maintain royal decorum. A flicker of recognition crossed her face, followed by something harder, remembrance not just of their meeting, but of its ending. Yes, Your Highness, she replied, loud enough for those nearest to hear. It is I, Not quite the monster bride you expected, I imagine. From the corner of the altar, Rebecca stood frozen, her carefully orchestrated plan crumbling before her eyes. This was no trembling, disfigured girl who would be easily humiliated. This was a woman whose very presence commanded attention. Worse still, a woman the prince clearly recognized. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur. Nathaniel spoke his vows automatically, his mind reeling when he slipped the royal ring onto Eleanor's finger. His gaze caught on another piece of jewelry, a silver bracelet with an intricate design of an eagle and rose intertwined. His breath caught. That symbol, the ancient crest of Westridge before his grandfather simplified it to just the eagle. How did a supposed East Shore princess come to wear it? Eleanor noticed his attention and subtly turned her wrist, hiding the bracelet beneath the folds of her sleeve. Her eyes met his, a clear warning. Not now, not here. When their hands joined for the final blessing, Nathaniel abandoned the plans he'd made with Rebecca. The goblet stayed upright, the whispers undisturbed. Something far more important than a hasty annulment had presented itself. A mystery that connected a peasant girl he'd met by chance, a bracelet bearing his family's original crest, and the princess of an enemy kingdom. As they turned to face the assembly as husband and wife, his father clapped him firmly on the shoulder, a rare show of approval. But the king's eyes weren't on Nathaniel. They were fixed on Eleanor's wrist where the bracelet had momentarily peeked out. In that gaze, Nathaniel saw something he'd never witnessed before. His father, the unshakable King Frederick, looked afraid. The recessional music swelled as they proceeded back down the aisle. Eleanor moved with unexpected grace, navigating even the supposedly loosened stone on the cathedral steps without faltering. It was as if she'd been warned. Or perhaps, Nathaniel realized with growing unease, she was simply more observant than anyone had anticipated. Outside, bright midday sun and the cheers of common folk greeted them. For show, Nathaniel raised their joined hands to the crowd. Eleanor's smile was perfect. Practiced, he now realized, revealing nothing of the tension he felt in her fingers. "We have much to discuss, husband," she said through that smile, her voice barely audible over the crowd's roar. "Indeed we do, wife," he replied, matching her facade, "beginning with how the girl I met by a river came to be the princess of East Shore. And perhaps," she countered smoothly, "how that same girl was arrested for a theft she didn't commit, while the boy she helped stood silent." Their gazes locked, a decade of unspoken history crackling between them. From the cathedral steps, Rebecca watched their exchange with narrowed eyes. This was not the blushing, overwhelmed bride she'd prepared to destroy. This woman had stepped into the court of Westridge like one returning home rather than entering enemy territory. More disturbingly, something had passed between Eleanor and the king, a moment of recognition that made no sense. Frederick had never set foot in East Shore, and Eleanor had supposedly been hidden away her entire life. Unless, Rebecca's hand tightened around a small vial concealed in her sleeve. Plan I had failed spectacularly, but she'd prepared for contingencies. The wedding feast would provide ample opportunity for more direct methods. As the royal couple entered their carriage, Eleanor cast one glance back at the assembled court. Her eyes passed over Rebecca as if she were just another face in the crowd. But Rebecca wasn't fooled. There had been assessment in that look. Calculation. The game had changed. The monster bride had turned out to be something far more dangerous. A worthy opponent, the wedding feast dragged into its fifth hour, an elaborate performance of alliance and goodwill. Beneath the surface pleasantries, currents of tension swirled through the great hall of Westridge Castle. Eleanor sat beside Nathaniel at the high table, their shoulders nearly touching but a chasm between them. Neither had spoken more than ceremonial pleasantries since the cathedral. "You've barely touched your wine," Nathaniel observed, breaking their silence as servants cleared away another course. Eleanor's fingers traced the rim of her goblet. "Mistress Wren taught me to keep a clear head at celebrations. The distracted make easy targets," she would say. "Wise advice." He studied her profile. "This Mistress Wren, she raised you. She saved me." Eleanor's eyes remained on the dancing nobles below, though I didn't understand from what until recently. Before Nathaniel could press further, Lady Rebecca approached the high table and curtsied deeply. "My congratulations, your highnesses." Her smile was radiant, betraying nothing of her earlier shock. Princess Eleanor, we've all been so curious about you. The rumors did you such disservice. Rumors often do, Eleanor replied evenly, but they serve their purpose, don't they? Rebecca's smile flickered. I'm not sure I follow, Your Highness. Expectations shape perception. If people expect a monster, even an angel would disappoint. Eleanor finally turned her full attention to Rebecca. And you are Lady Rebecca Harlow, royal counselor and companion to Prince Nathaniel since his educational years. The subtle emphasis wasn't lost on Eleanor. How fortunate for my husband to have such dedicated companionship. Nathaniel cleared his throat. Lady Rebecca has been instrumental in court affairs. I have no doubt. Eleanor's smile was pleasant, but her eyes were shrewd. I look forward to learning much from you. Lady Rebecca. Rebecca curtsied again and retreated, her composure intact, but her knuckles white around her fan. She's been your lover for years, Eleanor stated once Rebecca was out of earshot. Not a question. A fact. Nathaniel choked slightly on his wine. You've been in the castle less than a day. Servants talk. Ladies-in-waiting gossip. And anyone with eyes can see the way she looks at you. Eleanor seemed unmoved by her own revelation. I don't expect fidelity in a political marriage, Nathaniel. I merely appreciate knowing where allegiances lie. Before he could respond, King Frederick signaled for the music to stop and rose to offer a toast. As the hall quieted, Eleanor noticed a servant approaching with a special tray of ornate goblets. One final tradition, Nathaniel explained. The cup of union. We drink together as kingdoms united. Eleanor carefully watched the servant's hands as he poured. The man's eyes flickered nervously toward Lady Rebecca, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. When the goblet reached Eleanor, she accepted it with a warm smile, but as she raised it to her lips, she pretended to catch the edge of her sleeve on the rim, tipping a few drops onto the tablecloth. Oh, she exclaimed, setting the cup down quickly. How clumsy. Please forgive me. The spilled wine sizzled slightly on the linen, the threads discoloring where the liquid touched. What a shame, Eleanor murmured, loud enough for only Nathaniel to hear. The cup seems tainted. Nathaniel's eyes widened, moving from the discolored cloth to Eleanor's composed face. Without a word, he switched their goblets before anyone could notice, then drained his in a single swallow. Eleanor raised the new cup to her lips and pretended to drink. To unity, Frederick concluded his toast, unaware of the exchange. To truth, Eleanor whispered in response. Later that night, walking the quiet corridors to their separate chambers, as tradition dictated for the first night of royal marriages, Nathaniel finally spoke the question that had been burning in his mind. How did you know? Eleanor glanced around to ensure they were truly alone. The servant's hands trembled. He looked to Lady Rebecca for confirmation. And I've spent 15 years identifying poisons by sight and smell. Foxglove has a distinctive sweet odor. Rebecca wouldn't... He stopped himself. I don't know what's happening in my own court anymore. Courts are labyrinths, Eleanor said. Everyone wears a mask, including you. Nathaniel stopped walking, forcing her to face him. The peasant girl I met by the river, the princess locked away for her own protection, which is the real mask. Eleanor's composure slipped for just a moment, revealing something vulnerable beneath. Both. Neither. I'm still figuring that out myself. They had reached the door to her chambers. Royal guards stood at a respectful distance, pretending not to eavesdrop. We can't talk freely here, Nathaniel said quietly. Tomorrow, meet me in the East Rose Garden after breakfast. There's a bench beneath an arbor where we won't be overheard. Eleanor nodded. Until tomorrow, then. Her chambers were opulent, with tapestries depicting East Shore's famous coastline and furniture inlaid with mother-of-pearl, everything a princess could want, except safety. Methodically, she checked the room as Mistress Wren had taught her, hidden passages behind tapestries, spaces under furniture where someone might hide, windows that might grant unwelcome entry. Satisfied, she dismissed her new ladies-in-waiting, insisting she preferred privacy for her evening prayers. Once alone, she removed the pendant Wren had given her and carefully pried it open to reveal a tiny compartment containing a fine white powder. She mixed it with water and applied the paste to the door handle and window latches, an old hunter's trick that would reveal if anyone touched them during the night. Only then did she allow herself to process the day's events. Nathaniel was not what she'd expected. The boy who had betrayed her had grown into a man with shadows in his eyes and questions of his own. And King Frederick, the way he'd stared at her bracelet suggested he knew more than he revealed. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Who is it?" she called, one hand reaching for the small knife she'd hidden beneath her pillow. "Lord Harrison, Your Highness, King Frederick's advisor. I must speak with you on an urgent matter." Cautiously, Eleanor cracked the door open. A thin man with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair bowed deeply. "Forgive the late hour, Princess, but some conversations are best held when the castle sleeps. What matter is so urgent it cannot wait until morning, Lord Harrison." The old man glanced nervously down the hall. "Your bracelet, Your Highness, the one you wear. May I see it?" Eleanor's hand instinctively covered her wrist. "Why?" "Because I'm one of the few still living who knows what it truly means." He lowered his voice further. "And because someone tried to enter your chambers through the servants' passage while you were at the feast. I interrupted them." Cold fear washed over Eleanor. "Who?" "I couldn't see their face, but they dropped this in their haste to escape." From his pocket, he withdrew a small silver hairpin with a distinctive emerald setting. Eleanor recognized it immediately. Lady Rebecca had worn it in her hair at the wedding. "Come in," she said, opening the door wider. "But be aware, Lord Harrison. I trust no one in this castle yet." "As you shouldn't." He entered, careful not to touch the door handle where she'd applied the powder. "But you should know that not everyone in Westridge is your enemy. Some of us have waited a very long time for your return." "My return? I've never been here before." Harrison's sad smile contradicted her. "Haven't you, child? Look at your bracelet." The eagle and rose intertwined, the original crest of the unified kingdoms, before the Great Divide, before brother turned against brother, and the rose was banished from Westridge heraldry. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying, Princess, that your mother knew exactly what she was doing when she placed that bracelet on your wrist and arranged your marriage to Nathaniel." His eyes held the weight of secrets kept too long. "She was trying to heal a wound 30 years in the making." Outside Eleanor's window, a shadow moved, a figure scaling the wall with practiced ease. By the time Eleanor thought to look, it had already disappeared into the darkness, leaving only questions in its wake. Morning light filtered through the rose garden, casting dappled shadows across the stone bench where Eleanor sat waiting. She'd barely slept, Lord Harrison's words echoing in her mind. Your mother knew exactly what she was doing, trying to heal a wound 30 years in the making. Footsteps on the gravel path announced Nathaniel's arrival. He wore riding clothes rather than formal attire, his expression guarded but curious. "You look tired," he said, taking a seat beside her. "I had an unexpected visitor last night." Eleanor recounted her conversation with Lord Harrison, watching Nathaniel's face carefully as she described the bracelet's significance and the intruder Harrison had interrupted. Nathaniel's expression darkened. "And you're certain the hairpin belonged to Rebecca? It matched what she wore yesterday. But that's hardly proof." Eleanor leaned forward. "What matters more is what Harrison said about our families, about a great divide and the original unified crest." "My father never speaks of history before his reign," Nathaniel admitted. "Court records from that time are selective, rewritten," Eleanor suggested, "like my own history." She twisted the bracelet on her wrist. "We need answers that go beyond court gossip and old men's cryptic warnings." Nathaniel hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "There's a place we might look. The royal archives beneath the East Wing. Records too valuable to destroy, but too dangerous to keep accessible. Can you get us in? I've visited before, when seeking information my father withheld." His half-smile revealed a glimpse of the rebellious boy she'd once met. "Tonight, after the castle quiets, I'll come for you." Their conversation shifted to safer topics as gardeners worked nearby, but neither missed the significance of their agreement. Their first real alliance as husband and wife. As they parted ways, Eleanor noticed a small folded paper that hadn't been on the bench when she arrived. She slipped it into her sleeve, waiting until she was alone in a quiet alcove to read it. "Trust no one who doesn't acknowledge the rose. The viper has many friends. Watch your cup and your back." The handwriting was unfamiliar, the warning unsettling. Eleanor tucked it away, wondering who else in the castle might be an ally, or another threat. That afternoon, Eleanor explored the castle under the guise of familiarizing herself with her new home. Her ladies-in-waiting trailed behind, eager to gossip about court scandals. "Is it true," Eleanor asked casually, "that Lady Rebecca's family has connections to Eastshore?" Lady Marjorie, the oldest of her companions, nodded enthusiastically. "Her mother was Eastshore nobility who married a Westridge baron, though some say," she lowered her voice dramatically, "that her actual father was of much higher rank, higher than a baron." "The highest," Lady Marjorie whispered. "There were rumors about the late king of Eastshore having indiscretions. Lady Rebecca was born 9 months after a diplomatic visit." Eleanor kept her expression neutral. Despite the implications, if Rebecca was the illegitimate daughter of Eastshore's former king, Eleanor's father, that would make her Eleanor's half-sister, a daughter denied recognition while Eleanor, though thought dead, remained the legitimate heir, a motive for hatred that went far beyond a lover's jealousy. Their tour led them to the castle's western tower, where Eleanor paused to admire the view. From this height, she could see the entire castle layout, including the east wing where the archives waited. A sudden commotion in the courtyard below caught her attention. Guards rushed toward the kitchens, servants scattered in panic. "What's happening?" Eleanor asked. "I'll find out, Your Highness," Lady Marjorie offered, hurrying away. Left briefly alone, Eleanor studied the east wing more carefully. Noting guard positions and patrol patterns, her concentration broke when she spotted a familiar figure crossing the courtyard. Lady Rebecca, walking with purposeful strides toward the king's chambers, Lady Marjorie returned, breathless with excitement. A kitchen boy collapsed after tasting the princess's afternoon tea. The master healer says it was poisoned. Eleanor's blood ran cold. Is the boy alive, but gravely ill? The healer doesn't know if he'll recover. An innocent boy suffering in her place. Eleanor's hands clenched into fists beneath her sleeves. "I should visit him. Perhaps I can help." "You? Your Highness?" Lady Marjorie looked scandalized. "I have some knowledge of healing herbs," Eleanor said, already moving toward the stairs. "In Eastshore, princesses are taught practical skills alongside royal etiquette. In the healer's chambers, chaos reigned. The collapsed boy lay on a cot, his skin ashen, breathing shallow. Master Finnegan, the royal healer, argued with guards about securing the kitchen while mixing ineffective remedies. Eleanor approached the boy's bedside, immediately recognizing the symptoms. Dilated pupils, slowed heartbeat, shallow breathing. "Nightshade," she murmured. Master Finnegan turned sharply. "Your Highness shouldn't be here." "Belladonna poisoning," Eleanor continued, ignoring him. "He needs activated charcoal immediately, followed by a tincture of ginger root and valerian to steady his heart." The healer blinked in surprise. "How would you know?" "Please," Eleanor interrupted. "There's no time to question my knowledge. This boy will die within the hour without proper treatment." Something in her voice, authority without arrogance, broke through the healer's resistance. He nodded to his apprentice, who hurried to prepare the treatments Eleanor suggested as they worked together to save the boy. Master Finnegan's initial suspicion transformed into reluctant respect. "You have remarkable knowledge for a princess, Your Highness." "Knowledge shouldn't be limited by title," Eleanor replied, carefully administering the tincture. "And this knowledge might be all that stands between this child and death." By evening, the boy's condition had stabilized. Word of Eleanor's intervention spread through the castle, creating a new narrative that countered the monster bride rumors. A princess who worked alongside servants to save a common boy's life. She was returning to her chambers, exhausted but satisfied, when she encountered King Frederick in a quiet corridor. "You've caused quite a stir today, daughter-in-law," he said, his voice neutral but his eyes calculating. Eleanor curtsied. "I only did what anyone with my training would do, Your Majesty. That's precisely what interests me." "Your training." Frederick gestured for her to walk with him. "Eastshore princesses aren't typically known for healing skills. I had an unconventional upbringing, so it seems." His gaze dropped to her bracelet. "That's an unusual piece, family heirloom." Eleanor's pulse quickened. "A gift from my mother before she died. May I?" Without waiting for permission, Frederick took her wrist, turning the bracelet to examine the eagle and rose design. His fingers traced the intricate pattern, lingering on the rose. "Beautiful craftsmanship, ancient. Do you recognize it, Your Majesty?" Eleanor asked boldly. Something flickered in Frederick's eyes. Recognition, certainly, but also fear. It reminds me of old stories, legends from before the kingdoms divided. He released her wrist abruptly. Be careful with your talents, princess. Not everyone appreciates a woman with unusual skills. The warning in his tone was unmistakable. Is that why someone poisoned my tea? Eleanor asked. Frederick's expression hardened. The matter is being investigated by the same people who spread rumors of my deformity, or perhaps by those who stand to benefit from my death. You speak dangerously, daughter-in-law. I nearly died today, Your Majesty. A child nearly died in my place. Danger has already found me. They had reached a junction in the corridor. One path leading to Eleanor's chambers, another to the king's. Rest well, princess, Frederick said, his voice lower, and perhaps keep your healing knowledge between us. Some at court might find it unsettling. As he walked away, Eleanor noticed a small leather-bound book peeking from his pocket, old and worn, with a familiar symbol embossed on its spine, an eagle and rose intertwined, midnight cloaked Westridge Castle in shadow, the only sounds being the occasional call of a night guard and the distant hooting of an owl. Eleanor waited by her chamber door, dressed in a simple dark gown, her hair braided tightly against her head. When the soft knock came, she was ready. Nathaniel stood in the corridor, similarly dressed for stealth. Without a word, he handed her a hooded cloak. The guards, she whispered, pulling it on. Distracted, I arranged for a small commotion in the west wing. His voice held a hint of the mischievous boy she'd once known. We have about an hour. They moved through the sleeping castle like ghosts, taking servants' passages and hidden corridors. Nathaniel clearly knew the castle's secrets well, the product of years spent avoiding his royal duties. Eleanor suspected. How often do you sneak around your own castle? She asked as they descended a narrow spiral staircase. Often enough to know which steps creak and which guards can be bribed. He paused at a landing, checking for movement below. Though, usually I'm heading out, not deeper in. The archives were housed beneath the east wing, behind a heavy oak door with iron reinforcements. Nathaniel produced a key from beneath his shirt. Borrowed from Lord Harrison, he explained, seeing her questioning look. I told him what we're doing. He couldn't come himself, too suspicious if we were all caught, but he wanted to help. The lock turned with surprising quietness, suggesting regular oiling. Inside, the archive smelled of dust and old parchment. Nathaniel lit a small lantern, revealing rows of shelves laden with books, scrolls, and document boxes. What exactly are we looking for? Eleanor asked, scanning the overwhelming collection. Harrison mentioned a personal diary kept by my grandfather, King William. It supposedly contains accounts of the great divide between our kingdoms. Nathaniel moved to a far corner. The older records are here. They worked methodically, examining dusty tomes and faded scrolls. Many documents showed signs of tampering, pages removed, sections crossed out, revisions obvious even to an untrained eye. History is written by the victors, Nathaniel muttered, closing yet another altered text. And my father has been very thorough. Eleanor paused at a large oak chest tucked between shelves. Unlike the other furniture, it bore no dust. Someone had accessed it recently. The lock was new, out of place among the ancient artifacts. Nathaniel, she called softly. This looks promising. He examined the lock. No key for this one, I'm afraid. Eleanor reached into her hair, extracting a slender metal pin. Mistress Wren taught me more than just healing. Nathaniel raised an eyebrow, but said nothing as she worked the lock until it clicked open. Inside lay several items: a rolled parchment sealed with wax, a small wooden box, and a leather-bound book, identical to the one Eleanor had glimpsed in King Frederick's pocket. That's it, Nathaniel breathed. My grandfather's diary. The book's pages were yellowed with age, the handwriting elegant but hurried, as if the writer feared interruption. They carefully laid it on a reading table and began to scan its contents. Most entries were mundane royal business, but as they approached the final third, the tone changed dramatically. August 15th. Frederick grows more restless. His jealousy of Edward is becoming dangerous. Today, I caught him examining the royal sword in a manner that chilled my blood. I've written to Queen Sophia of Eastshore to warn her. But I fear my letter may be intercepted. Edward, Eleanor questioned. That was my father's name. Nathaniel continued reading, his voice growing tighter with each entry. September 3rd. Disaster. Blood on the hands of my own son. Edward fled to East Shore with his new bride, Sophia. But Frederick's rage has not subsided. He speaks of war, of reclaiming what should be his. I cannot control him anymore. September 10th. I've hidden the true crest of our house, the eagle and rose that symbolize the unified lands, and given its twin to Edward for safekeeping. Frederick has already commissioned a new seal with only the eagle. He says the rose represents weakness. He does not understand that together they represented balance. Eleanor's hand moved unconsciously to her bracelet, the eagle and rose suddenly heavy with meaning. October 21st. My heart can bear no more. Frederick has declared himself king after my unfortunate hunting accident tomorrow. Edward remains in East Shore, building support among those loyal to the true succession. The brothers who played together as children now stand divided by ambition and blood. I leave this record in the hope that someday, someone will heal this rift before both kingdoms fall. The final entry was blotched with what looked like dried tears. To whoever finds this diary, the true heir of the unified kingdoms is neither of my sons, but the child of their joined bloodlines. When the eagle and rose are reunited in a single bearer, the prophecy will be fulfilled. May the gods forgive what I was too weak to prevent. My grandfather's hunting accident was 3 days after this entry, Nathaniel said hoarsely. My father took the throne, and yours remained in East Shore, until he too died under mysterious circumstances when I was 3, Eleanor finished, leaving my mother vulnerable to whoever orchestrated her murder. They stared at each other, the implications overwhelming. Nathaniel wasn't just her arranged husband. Their marriage had been planned generations ago, a reunification of bloodlines deliberately torn apart. Frederick isn't... Nathaniel struggled with the words. He killed his own father and tried to kill his brother. He's not the rightful king, and I'm not just East Shore's princess, Eleanor said quietly. According to this, our bloodlines were never meant to be separate. A new thought struck her. The wooden box. What's inside? Nathaniel carefully opened it, revealing a silver medallion on a delicate chain. The same eagle and rose design from Eleanor's bracelet adorned its surface. My mother had one just like this, she whispered, in the only portrait of her that survived. She was wearing it the day she died. Nathaniel handed her the medallion reverently. As Eleanor held it, she noticed a small seam along the edge. It opens, she realized, carefully working the mechanism until the medallion split, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside lay a tiny scrap of parchment with a single line of text. The true heir resides in the blood of both, protected by the sign that cannot be broken. The sign that cannot be broken, Eleanor repeated. The eagle and rose, my bracelet. A sudden noise from the corridor froze them both. Footsteps approached the archive door, accompanied by the jingle of keys. Guards, Nathaniel whispered. We need to hide. Quickly, they replaced everything except the medallion, which Eleanor slipped around her neck, concealing it beneath her gown. Nathaniel extinguished the lantern and pulled her behind a large bookcase. Moments before the door opened, light from a guard's torch swept the room. Eleanor held her breath, pressed against Nathaniel in the narrow space. His heartbeat was steady against her back, his arm protective around her waist. The guard completed his inspection and left, but they remained hidden, acutely aware of each other in the darkness. Frederick knows, Nathaniel whispered against her hair. That's why he recognized your bracelet. That's why he's been watching you so carefully. And why someone's trying to kill me, Eleanor added. I'm not just a political pawn. I'm a threat to everything he built on lies. As they cautiously made their way back through the sleeping castle, the weight of revelation hung between them. They were no longer strangers forced into marriage, but unwitting players in a game that began before their births. At Eleanor's door, Nathaniel hesitated. We can't let anyone know what we've discovered, not yet. Agreed. We need more than just a diary as proof. Eleanor touched the hidden medallion. But we're close, Nathaniel. The truth is coming to light. He caught her hand, his eyes searching hers. Whatever happens, whatever we learn, know that I'm with you now. No more standing silent. It was as close to an apology for their past as he could offer. Eleanor nodded. understanding the promise it represented. Neither of them noticed the shadow that detached itself from an alcove as Nathaniel walked away, nor the figure that followed him silently down the darkened corridor. "The Vidente's prophecy is clear," Lord Harrison explained, carefully unrolling an ancient parchment across his private study table. "When the blood divided unites again, the kingdoms shall flourish. But if the veil of lies remains, all will be consumed by flames." 3 days had passed since Eleanor and Nathaniel's discovery in the archives. They had sought out Harrison, sharing what they had learned while carefully gauging his reaction. The old counselor had listened without surprise, as if he'd been waiting years for this conversation. "King Frederick has used this prophecy to justify the marriage alliance," Eleanor observed, "but twisted its meaning to suit his purposes." Harrison nodded grimly. "The prophecy predates the division of the kingdoms. It was never about a political alliance between separate royal houses. It was a warning against dividing what was meant to be unified. The eagle and the rose," Nathaniel said, his gaze moving to Eleanor's bracelet. "The original symbol of the unified lands." "Indeed." Harrison adjusted his spectacles. "The Vidente who spoke this prophecy was said to have died immediately afterward. The effort of seeing so far into the future taking her life. Her words were recorded by her acolyte and kept in the royal archives for generations, until my father removed them," Nathaniel guessed, "along with anything else that challenged his version of history." "Not removed," Harrison corrected. "Hidden. Even Frederick feared the consequences of destroying such a sacred text." He gestured to the parchment before them. "This is my personal copy, made in secret before the original disappeared." Eleanor studied the ancient script. Beyond the familiar lines they'd heard, additional verses continued. "The rose and eagle, torn apart, must find their way back to one heart, blood of both, in one vessel flowing. Truth revealed by bracelet glowing. When false king falls and true queen rises, light will dawn in new disguises. Blood of both. In one vessel flowing," she read aloud, a chill running through her. "That can't mean—" "You," Harrison said softly. "You are the vessel that carries both bloodlines." Eleanor's head snapped up. "Both, but I'm Eastshore, daughter of Edward and Sophia." Harrison and Nathaniel exchanged glances. "You haven't told her," Harrison said. "I didn't know how," Nathaniel admitted. "I only pieced it together myself yesterday." "Told me what?" Eleanor demanded. Nathaniel took her hands in his. "The diary entry mentioned Edward fleeing with his new bride Sophia. I couldn't understand why that detail mattered until I spoke with my old nurse yesterday. She revealed that Sophia was originally betrothed to Frederick, not Edward." Eleanor struggled to process this. "So my mother was engaged to Frederick before marrying my father." "More than that," Harrison interjected gently. "According to records I've uncovered, Sophia was with child when she fled with Edward." The implication struck Eleanor like a physical blow. "You're saying Frederick is my true father? That's impossible. My mother would never—" "Not by choice," Harrison said, his voice hardening. "The old nurse confirmed rumors that Frederick forced himself on Sophia shortly before her wedding. When she confided in Edward, he chose to claim the child as his own and flee with her to Eastshore." Eleanor fell silent, her world tilting on its axis. The bracelet on her wrist suddenly felt like a shackle. "That's why my father recognizes the bracelet," she whispered finally. "That's why he looks at me with fear. I'm not just a political threat. I'm living proof of his greatest crime, and the physical embodiment of the prophecy," Harrison added. "Blood of both, in one vessel flowing. You carry the bloodlines of both brothers, the eagle and the rose, reunited." Nathaniel had gone pale. "Then she's my cousin," Harrison clarified quickly. "Not sister. Frederick and Edward were brothers. Your bloodlines are connected, but your marriage is not." He cleared his throat. "Inappropriate." Relief washed over both their faces, followed immediately by the weight of new understanding. "Rebecca," Eleanor said suddenly, "if the rumors are true that she's my father, Edward's illegitimate daughter, then she's my half-sister. But she doesn't know I'm also Frederick's daughter, which explains why she's trying to kill you," Nathaniel concluded. "She believes she's avenging her father's murder by destroying Frederick's line, not realizing you share the same father." Harrison nodded soberly. "Lady Rebecca has been playing a dangerous game for years, working her way into Frederick's confidence while plotting his downfall. She seeks what she believes is her birthright, the throne of East Shore, at minimum. But if what you say is true, Eleanor pressed, then I carry the bloodlines of both kingdoms. According to this prophecy, I'm the rightful heir to both thrones, which makes you doubly dangerous to both Frederick and Rebecca, Harrison warned. Nathaniel paced the small study. We need more proof before confronting my father. The diary and prophecy alone won't be enough to convince the royal council. There is one place we haven't looked, Harrison said, his voice dropping further. The sanctuary of the Vidente, deep beneath the castle. Legend says it contains irrefutable evidence of the true royal lineage, a magical tablet that reveals bloodlines when touched by a rightful heir. If such a place exists, why hasn't my father destroyed it? Nathaniel asked. Because he can't enter, Harrison replied. The sanctuary can only be accessed by those who carry both the eagle and the rose, physically and in their blood. Eleanor touched her bracelet. You're saying this could open the sanctuary, combined with your bloodline? Yes, but finding the entrance won't be easy. Harrison moved to his bookshelf, extracting a dusty tome. According to this, the entrance lies where water flows beneath stone, where light meets dark at the hour of balance. The old well in the north courtyard, Nathaniel realized. It's built over an underground stream, and there's a strange alcove beside it that catches the sunlight at exactly midday. Harrison nodded approvingly. Tomorrow at noon, then, I'll create a distraction to clear the courtyard. A knock at the study door made them all freeze. Harrison quickly rolled the prophecy parchment and slid it beneath other papers. Enter, he called, composing his features. A young page appeared, bowing nervously. Your Highnesses, the king requests your immediate presence in the Great Hall. A messenger has arrived from East Shore with urgent news. Eleanor and Nathaniel exchanged worried glances. We'll come at once, Nathaniel replied. As they followed the page through the castle corridors, Eleanor whispered, What if they know what we've discovered? Then we accelerate our plans, Nathaniel murmured back. But first, let's hear this urgent news. The Great Hall buzzed with activity, courtiers clustering in whispered conversation. King Frederick sat on his throne, his expression inscrutable as they approached. Beside him stood Lady Rebecca, her face a perfect mask of concern. Ah, my son and his bride, Frederick announced, silencing the hall. You arrived just in time to hear the troubling developments from East Shore. A travel-worn messenger stepped forward. Bowing deeply, Your Majesties, I bring grave news. Lord Pembroke, Regent of East Shore, was found dead in his chambers 3 days ago. Evidence suggests poison. Gasps rippled through the court. Lord Pembroke had been the man who gave Eleanor away at the wedding, the last significant figure from her past in East Shore. Worse still, the messenger continued. Documents were discovered in his possession, suggesting treason against both kingdoms, plans for assassinations, including, he hesitated, glancing at Eleanor, attempts on the princess's life, to be blamed on Westridge and used to justify war. Murmurs of outrage filled the hall. Eleanor kept her expression neutral, though inside she reeled at the obvious fabrication. How fortunate that our alliance was formalized before this treachery was revealed, Frederick declared. East Shore now stands without leadership, its regent exposed as an enemy to peace. A regency council must be appointed, Lady Rebecca suggested smoothly. Perhaps your Majesty might recommend suitable candidates to stabilize our sister kingdom during this crisis. Frederick nodded thoughtfully. A wise suggestion, Lady Rebecca. I shall consider who might best serve in this capacity. Eleanor saw the strategy unfolding with crystal clarity. With Pembroke dead, East Shore was vulnerable. If Frederick installed loyal puppets as regents, he would effectively control both kingdoms. The marriage alliance had been merely the first step in a complete takeover. If I may, Father, Nathaniel interjected, as my wife is East Shore's rightful queen, shouldn't she have primary voice in selecting its regents? Frederick's smile didn't reach his eyes. Of course, in theory, but given Princess Eleanor's youth and inexperience with East Shore politics, having been raised in seclusion, perhaps it would be wiser for more experienced heads to guide this transition. I'm sure my husband means no disrespect, Your Majesty, Eleanor said carefully. I would welcome your guidance in this matter. Their eyes met in silent battle, Frederick's calculating. Eleanor's unyielding despite her diplomatic words. For a moment, she thought she glimpsed something like recognition in his gaze. not of her as East Shore's princess, but as his own flesh and blood. The moment passed. Frederick waved a dismissive hand. We shall discuss the matter further tomorrow. For now, court is dismissed. As the crowd dispersed, Eleanor caught Rebecca watching her with narrowed eyes. The stakes had just risen dramatically. With Pembroke eliminated, the last person who knew Eleanor's true origins was gone. Tomorrow at noon couldn't come soon enough. The north courtyard stood deserted as the castle clock struck 12. True to Harrison's word, a minor fire in the stables had drawn guards and servants away, leaving Eleanor and Nathaniel alone by the ancient well. "Are you sure about this?" Nathaniel asked, eyeing the narrow stone structure dubiously. Eleanor nodded, the medallion heavy against her chest beneath her gown. "We need proof that even Frederick can't deny." She extended her bracelet-adorned wrist toward the weathered stones, where sunlight created a perfect circle of light. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, as the midday sun reached its zenith, her bracelet began to glow with an inner light. The stones beneath her hand shifted, revealing a narrow passage that spiraled downward into darkness. "The sanctuary," Eleanor breathed. "It's real." Nathaniel lit a small torch he'd brought concealed beneath his cloak. "I'll go first," he offered, but Eleanor shook her head. "The prophecy says only one with both bloodlines can safely enter. I need to go alone." His jaw tightened. "I'm not letting you—" "I'll be fine," she insisted. "You need to keep watch. If anyone comes, create a distraction." Reluctantly, he handed her the torch. Their fingers brushed, lingering longer than necessary. Something had shifted between them, a tentative trust born of shared discoveries and dangers. "Be careful," he said softly. Eleanor descended into darkness, the narrow staircase winding deep beneath the castle. The air grew cooler, damper, with an ancient stillness that pressed against her skin. Finally, the stairs ended at a small chamber carved from bedrock. At its center stood a pedestal of white stone, upon which rested a flat tablet inscribed with unfamiliar symbols. The walls were covered with faded paintings depicting the history of the kingdoms. Once unified, then divided by betrayal and blood, Eleanor approached the tablet hesitantly. According to Harrison, this stone would reveal the truth of her bloodline. She removed her bracelet, placing it beside the tablet, then laid her palm flat against the cold surface. The stone warmed beneath her touch. Light spread from her hand, illuminating the symbols which began to rearrange themselves into a family tree. At its top stood the names of kings long forgotten, branching down through generations until reaching two brothers, Frederick and Edward. From Frederick's line descended Nathaniel, his name glowing bright blue. From Edward and Sophia came a branch that stunned Eleanor. Two names side by side, Eleanor and Rebecca, both glowing deep red, but with a critical difference. Beside Eleanor's name, a thin blue line connected back to Frederick, confirming what Harrison had told them. She carried both bloodlines, but what made her gasp was the marking beside Rebecca's name. Not a royal crest, but a small dagger symbol, according to the legend inscribed below the tablet. This marked one who had committed regicide, the murder of a king. "Rebecca killed my father," Eleanor whispered, horrified. "Not just Pembroke. She murdered Edward of Eastshore." As the full implications dawned on her, Eleanor quickly sketched the family tree on a scrap of parchment she'd brought. No one would believe her without proof, and she couldn't remove the tablet from the sanctuary. When she emerged back into sunlight, Nathaniel's relieved expression quickly shifted to concern as he saw her face. "What did you find?" Eleanor showed him the drawing. "Rebecca is my half-sister, but she's also a kingslayer. She murdered our father, her own father, to begin her revenge against both royal houses." Nathaniel stared at the parchment, connecting pieces of a puzzle that had eluded them. "She's been plotting this for years, insinuating herself into my father's court, becoming my—" He trailed off, the betrayal fresh again. "We need to expose her before she kills again," Eleanor said urgently. "The sanctuary showed me more. Images of a grand feast where poison flows freely. I think it was a warning. The Unity Banquet," Nathaniel realized. "It's tomorrow night, to celebrate the new alliance between our kingdoms after Pembroke's treachery was exposed." The stones of the secret entrance slid closed behind them, once again appearing as nothing more than weathered well decorations. They retreated to the shelter of a nearby archway to continue their conversation away from potential observers. Rebecca will make her move at the banquet, Eleanor concluded. It's the perfect opportunity. All the powerful figures of both kingdoms gathered in one place. We need to stop her without revealing what we know about your bloodline, Nathaniel cautioned. If the court learns you're Frederick's daughter, it could cause chaos. Eleanor nodded grimly. We need a strategy. Frederick must be warned. Despite everything, he's still your father and the king. He won't believe us without proof, and we can't show him the sanctuary. Then we make Rebecca reveal herself, Eleanor decided. We set a trap. Their conversation was interrupted by approaching footsteps. They quickly separated, adopting casual poses just as Lady Rebecca appeared in the courtyard, her timing suspiciously convenient. Your Highnesses, she curtsied, her smile not reaching her eyes. What a lovely surprise to find you both here. Lady Rebecca, Nathaniel acknowledged stiffly. We were just discussing tomorrow's banquet. Ah, yes, it promises to be quite memorable. She turned to Eleanor. Princess, I've been meaning to ask about your remarkable healing skills. The entire castle speaks of how you saved that kitchen boy. Simple knowledge of herbs, Eleanor replied modestly. In East Shore, such skills are valued even among nobility. Indeed, Rebecca's gaze sharpened. I spent some time in East Shore as a child, yet I never observed their princesses working with common herbs and peasant remedies. The implied question hung in the air, a subtle challenge to Eleanor's claimed identity. Perhaps you moved in different circles than I did, Eleanor replied smoothly. East Shore is a diverse kingdom. Rebecca's smile tightened. Quite. Speaking of the banquet, I've taken the liberty of arranging the seating. You'll be pleased to know you'll both be seated at the high table, of course, alongside the king. How thoughtful, Nathaniel said. And yourself? Oh, I'll be nearby, close enough to attend to any needs that arise. She glanced at the sky. I should return to my duties, so much to prepare for tomorrow. As she walked away, Eleanor and Nathaniel exchanged significant looks. Rebecca's veiled threats only confirmed their suspicions. She's planning something for the high table, Eleanor whispered once Rebecca was out of earshot. Then we need our own plan, Nathaniel replied. Come to my chambers tonight after the castle sleeps. We'll need Harrison's help too. That evening, a messenger arrived at Eleanor's door with an unexpected gift. A magnificent gown of deep purple silk for the banquet, sent by King Frederick himself. The accompanying note read simply, For my daughter's wife, who has brought unexpected light to our court. The deliberate ambiguity of daughter's wife versus son's wife sent a chill through Eleanor. Did Frederick suspect she knew the truth of her parentage? As her ladies helped her try on the gown, Eleanor noticed something odd about its construction. The bodice was unusually rigid, with peculiar stitching along the sides. Dismissing her attendants, she examined the gown more closely, hidden within the seams. She discovered thin pockets that could easily conceal small vials or weapons. The gown wasn't just a gift, it was a tool, designed for someone who might need to carry concealed items. Frederick was arming her, but against whom? Rebecca? Or was this another elaborate trap that night? As she slipped through shadowy corridors toward Nathaniel's chambers, Eleanor carried with her not just the knowledge from the sanctuary, but also the modified gown. Evidence that the game they played had more players than they'd realized. The banquet loomed less than a day away. Their plan would need to account for treachery from all sides, with the fate of two kingdoms hanging in the balance. The great hall of Westridge Castle blazed with light from 1,000 candles. Tapestries depicting glorious battles hung from stone walls, while musicians played melodies that blended Westridge's martial rhythms with East Shore's flowing harmonies. A symbolic union of cultures. Nobles from both kingdoms mingled cautiously. Enemies until recently, now forced into uneasy alliance, Eleanor entered on Nathaniel's arm, resplendent in the purple gown Frederick had sent. She had carefully filled its hidden pockets with her own preparations, a vial of antidote, dried herbs that could detect certain poisons, and a small knife. The weight of the medallion remained against her chest, hidden beneath her bodice. Remember the plan, Nathaniel murmured, as they approached the high table where King Frederick awaited. Show nothing until the right moment. Their strategy, developed with Harrison's counsel, was dangerously simple. Appear divided to lower Rebecca's guard. watch for her move, then turn the tables at the crucial moment. But plans rarely survived first contact with the enemy, as Nathaniel had grimly reminded her. "My son and his bride," Frederick greeted them, rising from his ornate chair. "You honor us with your beauty tonight." "Princess Eleanor, your gift was most generous, your majesty," she replied, curtsying deeply. The double meaning hung between them like an unsheathed blade. Frederick's gaze lingered on her a moment too long, searching for something in her features. Did he see Sophia in her eyes, or himself in the set of her jaw? The feast began with elaborate ceremony. 7 courses would be served, representing the 7 virtues that supposedly united the kingdoms. Servants moved with practiced precision, pouring wine and placing platters of exquisitely prepared delicacies before the guests. Eleanor observed Rebecca circulating among the lower tables, playing the perfect courtier, laughing at nobles' jokes, refilling cups, whispering confidences, yet her eyes constantly darted to the high table, watching, waiting. "She's too confident," Eleanor whispered to Nathaniel as they pretended to bicker over a shared bread plate. "She must have accomplices." Nathaniel nodded imperceptibly, his gaze scanning the servers. "The man with the wine, the one with the scar on his right hand, he served my father twice, but skipped the tasting ritual both times. Protocol demanded that each dish and drink be tasted before reaching the royal table, a precaution against exactly the kind of plot they suspected. Someone circumventing this procedure was an immediate concern. As the 4th course concluded, King Frederick rose to offer a toast. Servers hurried to fill special ceremonial goblets, ancient silver chalices inlaid with gemstones representing both kingdoms. The scarred server approached with a crystal decanter, filling Frederick's goblet first, then Nathaniel's. As he reached Eleanor's cup, she deliberately shifted her arm, knocking a spoon to the floor. "My apologies," she murmured, using the momentary distraction to discreetly drop a pinch of detection herbs into all 3 goblets while the server bent to retrieve the utensil. The herbs should change color upon contact with most common poisons. When nothing happened, Eleanor felt a flash of uncertainty. Had they misread Rebecca's plan? Frederick raised his goblet high. "To unity between our peoples, stronger than the divisions of the past." The assembly echoed his words. Goblets raised. Eleanor brought hers to her lips but didn't drink, watching carefully as Frederick sipped from his chalice. Nothing happened then. As Frederick lowered his cup, his eyes locked with someone in the crowd. Rebecca, standing perfectly still amidst the revelry, her own goblet untouched. Her gaze unflinching as she stared at the king. Frederick's face changed, a flash of recognition followed by horror. He stared at his goblet, then back at Rebecca, comprehension dawning too late. "The wine," he gasped, his voice suddenly strained. "It's..." His body seized, the goblet falling from spasming fingers. Silver clattered against stone as Frederick collapsed into his chair, clutching his chest. Chaos erupted. Guards rushed forward. Courtiers screamed. Nobles scrambled to distance themselves from the high table. Nathaniel leapt to his father's side while servants scattered in panic. "Poison!" someone shouted, triggering more screams. Eleanor moved with practiced calm, extracting her vial of antidote. "Help me hold him," she commanded the guards. "He needs this quickly." Frederick's face had turned an alarming shade of purple, veins standing out on his temples as he struggled for breath, his eyes bulging with panic, fixed on Eleanor as she approached with the antidote. "Trust me," she whispered, holding his gaze. "Father." His eyes widened at the word, but he stopped struggling against the guards. Eleanor administered the antidote, tipping the liquid carefully between his lips. For several agonizing moments, nothing happened. Then Frederick gasped, drawing a ragged breath as some of the tension left his body. He wasn't cured. The poison was too strong for a complete reversal, but she had bought him time. "Find Lady Rebecca," Nathaniel ordered the guards. "Don't let her leave the castle." But in the chaos, Rebecca had already disappeared. Guards rushed to secure the exits while Eleanor continued treating Frederick, who now lay semi-conscious on the stone floor, his breathing labored but stable. "He needs to be moved to his chambers," she instructed, quickly but gently. "The poison is slowed but still active," as guards carefully lifted the king. Frederick's hand suddenly gripped Eleanor's wrist with surprising strength. "Must Tell, he rasped. Truth, before. Save your strength, she urged. There will be time for truth later. No time, he insisted, his voice barely audible. Rebecca, my brother's daughter, she knows. About you. The guards paused. Uncertain, as Frederick struggled to continue. I killed him, he confessed, each word clearly causing him pain. My brother, your father, for the throne, for Sophia. His eyes, clouding with either poison or tears, sought Nathaniel. I am not the rightful king. Gasps rippled through the nearby courtiers who overheard. Nathaniel knelt beside his father, shock evident on his face despite their earlier discoveries. Why confess this now? He demanded. Her eyes, Frederick whispered, gaze drifting back to Eleanor. Rebecca has, his eyes, my brother's eyes, saw them tonight. New judgment had come. He coughed violently, blood speckling his lips. The prophecy, coming true. With tremendous effort, Frederick raised his voice enough for the closest nobles to hear clearly. Eleanor carries, both bloodlines, Eagle and Rose. Reunited, the true heir. His strength failing, Frederick slumped back. Eleanor checked his pulse, still present but weakening. We need to move him now, she insisted. As they carried Frederick from the hall, a commotion erupted near the main entrance. Guards dragged a struggling figure forward. Rebecca, caught trying to flee disguised as a servant. Murderess! Shouted a nobleman. Assassin! Rebecca ceased struggling, standing proudly despite the guards restraining her. I am no murderer, she declared, voice ringing through the hushed hall. I am justice. Her gaze locked with Eleanor's across the room. Ask your princess who she really is. Ask why she bears the bracelet of the unified kingdoms. Ask why her face mirrors both Sophia and the man who violated her. Murmurs spread like wildfire through the assembled nobles. Eleanor stepped forward, conscious that every eye in the hall now focused on her. I will answer all questions, she announced, her voice steady despite her racing heart. But first, see to the king's care. Why bother? Rebecca's laugh was bitter. The poison is my own creation, slow enough for suffering, but certain in its outcome. Even your herbs can't save him, sister. The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. Yes, I know the truth, Rebecca continued, addressing the stunned crowd. The great secret of our kingdoms. Eleanor is not just Edward's daughter, but also Frederick's, the living proof of his crime against my mother. Queen Sophia! She wrenched herself free from the momentarily shocked guards, extracting a hidden vial from her sleeve. You thought you had won, didn't you? The legitimate daughter triumphing over the bastard once again. Before anyone could reach her, Rebecca drained the vial's contents, her face contorting in triumph rather than fear. Too late, she gasped as guards seized her again. The poison, already spreading through him. But I'll be gone before. I have to watch another false ruler take what should have been mine. As Rebecca collapsed, her final condemning words echoed through the silent hall. 2 kings dead by my hand. The kingdoms will fall, as the prophecy foretold, unless the true bloodline rules. Dawn broke over Westridge Castle, pale light filtering through stained glass windows into the royal chamber where King Frederick lay dying. Healers had come and gone throughout the night, each departing with grim expressions that said more than words could. Rebecca's poison had been expertly crafted, slow enough to prolong suffering, yet inexorable in its progression. Eleanor hadn't left Frederick's side since the banquet, applying every remedy she knew, while Nathaniel managed the crisis unfolding throughout the castle. Nobles demanded explanations. Guards secured the perimeter against potential uprisings, and messengers raced between kingdoms with news of the dramatic events. You should rest, Lord Harrison advised, bringing her a cup of tea as morning light strengthened. You've done all that can be done. Eleanor shook her head, adjusting the cool cloth on Frederick's forehead. He's my father. Whatever his crimes, I won't abandon him now. Frederick's eyes fluttered open at her words, more lucid than they had been for hours. You have more compassion than I deserve, he whispered hoarsely. Save your strength, she urged, but Frederick weakly raised a hand to stop her. No, there's no time left for lies or silence. His gaze shifted to the window, where dawn painted the sky in hues of pink and gold. A new day comes. I won't see it end. The door opened as Nathaniel entered, his face drawn from a night of crisis management. Harrison discreetly withdrew, leaving the fractured family alone. "The council awaits word," Nathaniel reported, approaching the bedside. "They've been in emergency session since midnight." Frederick nodded weakly. "Then we must give them clarity before chaos takes hold." He gestured for Eleanor to help him sit up slightly. "There are things I must say while I still can. Things both kingdoms must hear." "Father," Nathaniel began. "Not now," Frederick interrupted with unexpected strength. "Summon the royal council, the East Shore delegates, and the court scribe. What I say must be witnessed and recorded." Nathaniel hesitated, then nodded, understanding the importance of formal succession in preventing civil war. He dispatched a servant with the summons, then returned to the bedside. "Rebecca?" Frederick asked. "Dead," Nathaniel confirmed. "By her own hand. As you saw, her final confession has thrown both courts into turmoil." Frederick closed his eyes briefly. "Edward's daughter. All these years. She was right under my nose. Plotting her revenge." A bitter smile crossed his pain-lined face. Perhaps justice has a sense of humor after all. Within the hour, the king's chambers filled with solemn officials, Westridge councillors in their dark formal robes, East Shore delegates in sea green, and the royal scribe with quill poised over parchment. Frederick, aided by Eleanor's herbal stimulant, rallied his strength for this final performance. "I, Frederick, son of William, make this confession of my own free will and sound mind," he began, his voice surprisingly steady. 30 years ago, I murdered my father, King William, during a hunting expedition, making it appear an accident to claim the throne that rightfully belonged to my elder brother, Edward." Shocked murmurs rippled through the assembly, despite the rumors that had circulated since the banquet. "Further, I attempted to force myself upon Edward's betrothed, Sophia, an act that drove them to flee to East Shore. When they established a rival court there, I orchestrated my brother's assassination, though I gave explicit instructions to spare Sophia and their child." Frederick's gaze found Eleanor, standing beside Nathaniel at the foot of the bed. "That child survived, unknown to me until recently. Princess Eleanor carries both our bloodlines, Edward's legitimate heir and my biological daughter. In her, the eagle and rose are reunited, fulfilling the ancient prophecy." The scribe's quill scratched frantically as Frederick continued, detailing his crimes, confessing his remorse, and finally coming to the matter of succession. "By right of both birth and prophecy, Eleanor is the true heir to the unified kingdoms. My son Nathaniel, though blameless in my crimes, carries only half the royal lineage needed to fulfill the Vidente's prophecy." Nathaniel showed no surprise at this pronouncement, having already accepted the truth revealed in the sanctuary. "Therefore," Frederick concluded, his strength visibly fading, "I renounce the throne of Westridge and recognize Eleanor as rightful queen of both kingdoms, with Nathaniel as her consort and equal in rule, should they so choose to maintain their union." The formal declaration complete, Frederick motioned for the officials to withdraw, leaving only Eleanor and Nathaniel by his bedside. As the door closed behind the last counselor, his regal facade crumbled, revealing just a dying man with profound regrets. "I never held you," he said to Eleanor, tears finally breaking through decades of rigid control. "My own child, and I never once held you." Eleanor took his hand, her own eyes damp despite everything he'd done. "You have the chance now." As morning sun filled the chamber with golden light, Frederick of Westridge died in the arms of the daughter he'd never known, his final words a whispered plea for forgiveness that only she heard. The castle bell tolled Frederick's passing, its solemn tone rolling across the city. Eleanor stood on the balcony overlooking the great courtyard, where nobles and commoners alike had gathered to hear what would follow. Beside her, Nathaniel waited, his presence a steady anchor in the storm. "Are you ready?" he asked quietly. Eleanor touched the silver bracelet on her wrist, the symbol that had guided her journey from hidden princess to this moment of truth. "No," she admitted, "but the kingdoms can't wait for us to be ready." She stepped forward to address the crowd, conscious of how unusual this scene would appear. A young woman presuming to speak after a king's death, without male regents to guide her. But these were unusual times that called for new approaches. "People of Westridge and East Shore," she began, her voice carrying clearly in the hushed courtyard. "King Frederick has passed into the hands of the gods. Before his death, he confessed to crimes that divided our kingdoms and recognized me as heir to both thrones." Murmurs swept through the crowd, but Eleanor raised her hand for silence. "I could claim this inheritance by right of blood alone, but that path has brought only suffering to our peoples." She unclasped the silver bracelet from her wrist, holding it high so the eagle and rose symbol caught the sunlight. "This represents what was torn apart by ambition and kept separate by lies. I will not perpetuate that division." She turned to Nathaniel, who stepped forward to join her. "Prince Nathaniel and I propose a new way forward. Not a simple unification of crowns under one ruler, but a transformation of how we govern." Nathaniel produced his ceremonial sword, symbol of royal authority, and to the crowd's astonishment, broke it across his knee. "The time of absolute rule ends today," he declared. "We propose a council of governance where nobility and common folk have equal voice, where Westridge and East Shore maintain their unique identities while working together for shared prosperity." Eleanor addressed the stunned silence that followed. "We were born to be symbols of division. Instead, let us become builders of cooperation." She removed her wedding veil, which had been incorporated into her formal attire, and held it high. "Like this veil, the falsehoods that separated us have been lifted. Truth, however painful, is the foundation upon which we must build." The proposal was revolutionary, shocking to many, frightening to some, yet stirring unexpected hope in others. As Eleanor and Nathaniel descended to the courtyard to speak directly with the people, breaking centuries of tradition that kept royalty distant and unapproachable, the first tentative steps toward a new kind of governance began. Seasons turned to years. The unified council faced challenges and resistance, yet gradually proved its value as harvests improved, trade flourished, and old hostilities faded. The prophecies promise, "When the blood divided unites again, the kingdoms shall flourish," manifested not just through Eleanor and Nathaniel's bloodlines, but through the joining of peoples once kept apart by royal feuds. On nights of the full moon, it became tradition for the royal couple to walk among the common districts without guards or finery. Just the silver bracelet with eagle and rose as marker of their identity. Children would run alongside them. Elders would share concerns directly, and the distance between rulers and ruled narrowed with each such journey. "Your mother would be proud," Mistress Wren told Eleanor during one such night, the old woman having finally accepted the invitation to join the royal household. "She hoped your healing knowledge would extend beyond herbs to the deeper wounds of the kingdoms." Eleanor smiled, watching Nathaniel across the village square as he listened intently to a farmer's concerns about irrigation. "We're still learning," she admitted. "The old ways had centuries to establish themselves. Our new path has barely begun." "But begun it has," Wren observed, her wise eyes seeing beyond the present moment.